Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be covering the weekly meta breakdown for the standard best of one format. What we're going to be covering today is currently the top 5 highest win rate decks in Mythic Rank for the first week of the season. And then I have 3 additional decks that are doing well by individual players, but like the aggregate win rates, including they're going to highlight the deck later on in the video for someone who was the first person to hit Mythic 1, it looks like, or at least at one point early on has hit Mythic Rank 1 with the deck. So we'll cover that deck. There's a couple cool decks that we'll cover there as well. So stay tuned. I think we'll do like that approach. Just seems more interesting early on as folks are kind of ranking up, because there's a lot of noise right now in Platinum. With like the folks who come from like gold and the people resetting from mythic, so want to focus on kind of that top end placement. So we get the data from Untapped GG, what you see on the screen, companion tool that aggregates your win rates with other users, gives us a bunch of cool stats. Link for Untapped is in the video description down below. I'll paste all these deck lists, timestamp them to your heart's content. If you enjoy this type of content, definitely do subscribe. We're trying to hit 15,000 on the channel. We come back every week with standard best of 1, best of 3, all the other arena formats. If there's events like metagame challenges, I come up with the best options there. So your one-stop shop for everything metagame when it comes to MTG Arena. So greatly appreciated if you can. So we'll jump into it. We're going to start off with the popularity of decks, what you're seeing in terms of the ladder, and then we'll look at the win rates themselves. Right now, because of popularity of the day, there's just not a huge sample of Mythic gamers. So we are just going to look at Platinum. We can see if there's Diamond, actually. So we have up to Diamond as well. So right now, we have Boros Convoke, about 10%, Azorius Control, about 9%. We're seeing an uptick in mono white humans in terms. It's pretty much the stock list that's been there for like ever. We can even pull up like a list. We have some folks that it's kind of cool. We get the top mythic players here now too. So I'll pull that up for later, and then we'll take a look at that one. Just didn't realize its popularity was creeping up like it was. We have the mono red prowess deck. So usually the mono red prowess versus mono red aggro. Prowess are the slick shot show off decks. I kind of go from there. The Rakdos Aggro is kind of, we'll take a look at a sample. It's mono red with some splashes of black. So don't get the Rakdos enjoyers, don't think it's a full Blood Tithe Harvester kind of reconvenement. It is mostly mono red. We have Golgari midrange and then Boros Heroic. Just kind of looking at the trends, we saw like at one point Boros Convoke was 44% of the meta. We saw mono red kind of jump it, crisscross. We're seeing again Boros Convoke at the beginning of the season pick up popularity and kind of normalize down. The win rates are pretty flat. Like the only one that stood out, there's a while where like Amalia was kind of beating up, kind of correlating to the Boros Convoke timeline. So it seemed like that was a good meta call at the time. There's nothing like overtly sticking out. Like we see Azorius Control showing a little and then Boros Convoke, but towards the top end, we're not really seeing the control deck show up in Mythic Rank actually, which is kind of interesting. So looking at best of 1, 31,000 games in Mythic for the last 7 days, April 28th through to the 5th. And we're going off the stats, folks, so I don't have bias, but mono red aggro, 67.5%. And this one here, it's built what I think is quite well in terms of just a bit of resiliency. So a lot of times these mono red decks are all in. Just the nature of best of 1, you tend to be dump my hand. Do I win by turn 3 or 4? No, let's go to the next game. This one here has got a little bit more grind for like the where you can kind of pivot. With the addition of Urabrask's Forge, this is a card that in my best of 3 lists is one of the first cards that comes in most games when people overboard. Mono red does have the ability, unlike say the mono white deck or the Convoke deck, to switch the role in the matchup, because you have stuff like Play with Fire, Lightning Strike that can go face but also could control your opponent's board. It lets you pick off your opponent's creatures, while Urabrask's Forge is just a continual clock that progressively gets bigger. This version here has got some prowess threats and Fugitive Codebreaker, Slick Shot Show Off, Swiss Spear, Still Your Monstrous Rage. Scorching Shot is just an additional removal spell, and then your kind of squee package with Witch Stalker Frenzy. So seeing how like the deck, we're getting this version of mono red that's a little bit more resilient when you have stuff like cut downs, temporary lockdowns, whatever it may be for removal. Then move to Boros Convoke, 65%. So this version here, pretty stock. Inspiring Vantage coming in. They still have to play Thran Portal just to kind of hit some of their lands. The new card that's seeing play is Requisition Raid. So one of the spree cards gives you a bit of flexibility, but most notably, it'll likely be played for 2 mana. For the last mode, put a 1/1 counter on each creature that player controls. Notably, this is a sorcery, so you can't do like blowout speed. The one that's like low-key could be quite useful is destroy target enchantment. So think if your opponent's on temporary lockdown, if they're on Leyline Binding, if they're like on the Temur ramp deck and they play the big enchantment, the virtue, green virtue, you can hit them that way there. So some flexibility with the card. Otherwise, it's just balls to the wall aggro, bunch of 1-drops that can then make you Spur of Tokens. Sanguine Evangelist gives you Battle Cry to pump your team. Imidane's Recruiter gives you a buff. The Case of the Gateway Express gives you a buff. Knight Errant. Very, very lean, aggressive deck. So yeah, if you like that, it's pretty much like a Pioneer deck at this point that you're playing in Standard. Now, the next deck. Budget deck doing well in Mythic, which you'll love to see it, folks. We featured this a couple times, but this is the Mono Blue Ninjas deck. 120 games in Mythic. 59% win rate. Don't let your memes stop you from having your dreams, or your dreams be memes, whatever that saying is. So this deck is kind of a Tempo Artifact Ninja aggro, like we all drew up in our boards. If you want to upgrade this deck, the easiest thing, some Otawara, I would switch the Roadside Reliquary to Mishra's Foundry, or you could do Myrex. I would say that in terms of updating the mana base. The core of the deck, you have like Ginger Brute, Network Disruptor are artifacts, in addition to creatures that have some pseudo evasion. Spyglass Siren is both those. Then what you can do is with Zoetic Griff or Unctus's Retrofitter, you get to turn those artifacts into bigger artifact creatures. Then you have the Ninja package where you have like Moon Circuit Hacker as well as Prosperous Thief that you can ninjutsu back these cheap cards. Mind Over Matter, and then Fading Hope as like tempo-based bounce effects. And then Hide Speed, Hover Bike. Smuggler's Copter at Home, that's just worse, but still can do something. Flash, do it at your opponent's end step, and then you get to crew in terms of just punching through some damage. Tapping down things can be useful to get through that damage as well. We then go to Temur Rage, 58.5%. So this is the Temur Analyst deck, as it's usually aforementioned. Core of this deck, you got Temur Analyst, Self-Milling, and then you have a bunch of these dependent lands that sack themselves and then get you a basic land and gain you a life. So what you're trying to do, play these, fill your graveyard, Analyst back, get them back, then you basically keep ramping ahead. Spelunking makes your lands come into play untapped. Nisid nets you mana whenever they come into play. And then what you're trying to do is either drop a Virtuous Strength to triple your mana, or use World Soul's Rage to both ramp you early and then be a big fireball to your opponent. You have Sweeper and Ill-Time Explosion as well. So this is one of the popular decks. It's a little soft the Graveyard Hate, but in Best of One you usually don't see the Graveyard Hate. Then the last of the 5th and highest win rate Mythic deck is Mono Black Skeletons. So 57.5%. We got Skellies, Cult Conscript and Forsaken Miner, 2 1-mana recursive skeletons that have 2 power, which is great. Cut down, go for the throat, so 8 pieces of good targeted removal. Tiny Bones joins up as a ping effect. Tiny Bones Pickpocket as just a way to kind of attack your opponent's graveyard. Usually they don't want to trade up, so it's kind of pseudo-evasive in that case, being a 1-drop Death Toucher. Case of the Stash Skeleton makes you a skeleton, and then can be basically sacked later on as a Demonic Tutor. Corpse of the Lost, so 3 mana, skeletons you control get +1/0 in haste, so even these guns coming back, you can get some value there. I think this one comes to play tapped. No, yeah, this one enters tapped, this one doesn't. They just both can't block. Oh no, this one could block, but this comes to play tapped, so it can't kind of block, in a way. Beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, you pay a life. If you do, you get to kind of bounce it back. So it's kind of a recursive bounce effect. And then you have Gissa Hellraiser, which can make you more skeletons and is a skeleton lord. that kind of plays. Oh, this makes zombies, not skeletons, but still, it's a skeleton lord. Sandstorm Verge from Blockable, Takenuma Field of Ruin. I would probably, I think I made this mention last time, instead of just playing this. I guess this does technically trigger Crime, whereas like the creature lands wouldn't, because target creature can't block this turn you're targeting. Same with Field of Ruin. That's an interesting kind of combo I didn't think about in that respect. But if you like your skeletons, I know someone was commenting one of my older mono black videos, there hasn't been much update to the mono black deck. I think it's just pivoting in terms of being like an invoke big mana deck to more aggressively slanted. So we're going to take a look at a couple decks here that were just featured individually. So this one here was the one that got Mythic 1. We see it here. They came out of Mythic 2, kind of went up to Mythic 3, got to Mythic 1. Currently sitting at Mythic 16. So this is November player, his username, and they are playing the Abuela Rakdos Joins Up combo. So how it works is you self-mill, so you have things like Rune Lurker Bat, you have Philogy, Otherworldly Gaze, Faithful Mending, Confounding Riddle, can put cards into your graveyard, Jace you could kind of mill. And then what you do is you Abuela back a Rakdos Joins Up. Rakdos Joins Up becomes a creature and it's additional to its other types. You then reanimate Hulking Metamorph, which becomes a copy of the creature version of Rakdos Joins Up. Legend rule, the Hulking Metamorph then goes to your graveyard, deals damage, and you basically have infinite damage that way there. So we can link this one. So this one was the one that got #1 Mythic. We then have the Rakdos Aggro deck. So this one's from Therakuz. They are currently hovering around like 150 Mythic. Fairly reasonable win rate with this, 141 and 76, so 65% win rate after like 200 odd games. Very, very just like started from the bottom, now we're here, just kind of solo run. So with this one here, it's more of a mono red kind of prowessy style. Scamp get you can throw it at your opponent after. Phineas Rage, Mirror-Blade Splicer, Monstrous Rage. You throw them at your opponent with Callous Sellsword's ability. Antagonize is pump. Blazing Crescendo is pump. Your Picnic Ruiners, and then Case for card advantage. Kind of mixed into there. So it's Rakdos in the bare minimum sense that you're playing a black card, but you only have one black source. So you're really not casting that creature side for the most part. And then we have a Return to the Mono White Humans deck. So this is the one we saw. So 82 and 37, 69%. This one peaked at about 92 Mythic for Souls-like. And not really seeing too many new cards here. We have like the Coppercoat Vanguards, the Ambitious Farmhand. So a little bit of like pseudo ramp. We are seeing like Sanguine Evangelist being played in a couple of copies in here. The Myrel and the Knight Errant of Eos. So kind of spreading around like your 3-drop slot. You still have your full Adeline, but only like 3 Brutal Cathars. Mono White has like a glut of semi-reasonable 3-drops that could be considered in that slot there. And then we have like the Caverns, since everything is humans, that you kind of take advantage of there. And then lastly, one of the cool decks that I saw, so this one, 28 and 12, so not a huge sample size, but still 40 games, 70% win rate. This is a Boros High Noon kind of pseudo combo deck. You're using both Monastery Mentor and Osier in combination with War Leader's Call to basically ping your opponent with tokens. You form a posse that's basically X. With War Leader's Call becomes a fireball. You create X creatures, 1/1s, and then each of those pings with War Leader's Call actually deals 4 damage with Osier. Otherwise, you have like no witness. You basically just as a sweeper, depopulate as a sweeper. Lightning Helix, get lost. Sacred Fire, so a lot of cheap removal to pair with it. And then High Noon means that your opponent can only cast 1 spell each turn. A little bit of a non-bow when you think about with Monastery Mentor, where you usually want to chain together a lot of stuff. But at the same time, you have a lot of instants that could just be played on your opponent's turn. So kind of an interesting list there as well. That's it for the week. Let me know what you think, what you've been playing, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.